The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Chris Congleton. I'd like to thank you for coming to our KYTC design webinar on sizing a pipe culvert using HY8. I'd like to thank Troy Woodyard for presenting for this. He's taken a lot of time and effort, I know that for a fact, in getting this together so that he can get us this information. It's actually very valuable. He's done a really good job. I think any designer probably needs this, so it should be a very valuable webinar, and we hope you enjoy it. A couple of questions, or excuse me, a couple of things before we start. Excuse me. The upcoming schedule on December 10th, we'll actually be doing a webinar on using parametric constraints, point controls, and end condition overrides. I'll actually be the presenter for this webinar, so be kind in your surveys if you don't mind. In January, we'll actually be having a webinar on using auto turn. There will probably be something else with that because auto turn probably won't take the entire hour. We haven't decided on what we're going to do with that also. But right now the plan is in January to do a webinar on auto turn. If you want to view past webinars, they can be found on the KYTC Highway Design website under Software and Support. If you actually go to the Highway Design website and you look down at the links or the resources, right here at that red arrow, you can actually see the Software and Support link, which will take you to the Software and Support page, and there you will find the YouTube videos of the past webinars. And it's always kind of nice to go back and rehash or look at something you've missed, or I know I use it actually quite a bit on things that I haven't done for a while, and I go back and I view those videos. If you want to go straight to the support and software page, if you type into Google KYTC software and support, it should show you a link that will take you directly to the page. If you have any questions about microstation inroads project-wise, you can contact us at kytccadsupport@ky.gov. We usually can answer most of your questions. I don't think there's been an answer that somebody hasn't been able to answer throughout my time here, so we're very good at that. So if you have any questions on those topics, please give us a holler through that email. A couple of reminders. You must be present for the entire webinar to earn your professional development hours. We actually have a monitor that actually shows how long each attendee has been in the webinar, so probably best suggestion is come early, stay late, or stay till the end. That way we can know for sure that you're gonna know for sure that you got your professional development hours. You can watch these webinars as a group, say in a conference room over a common television, and get your professional development hours. I suggest though that you actually make a sign-in sheet as a proof that you've watched this webinar, just in case you get audited. Excuse me. One thing that's come up that I probably need to address is I got a question a couple days ago. Could somebody get professional development hours for watching the archived YouTube videos that are on the software and support page? The answer to that is no. We have no way of determining who's watched it or whether or not they've really watched it. So since we can't prove it, audits can't prove it. If you get audited, they can't be proven, so we don't allow that. Those videos are for informational purposes, resource purposes, and just general information as a whole. So anyhow, I'll probably add that into these things so that everybody knows that. Please don't forget to participate in our survey at the end of the webinar. Those surveys are very invaluable to us. They get us information on, or basically feedback from those people who watch the webinars, and allow us to know what you'd like to see next, as well as feedback on our presenters, the webinars as a whole, what we can do better, what we've done well. So if you could, please don't forget to do that survey at the end of the webinar. Sometimes it takes a little time to get that webinar to pop up at the end of the webinar. Technologically, I don't understand why, but if you could just give it a few seconds, maybe 30 seconds for it to pop up and actually do that survey, that would be great. Thank you so much for that. And in this webinar, we actually have handouts. If you look in your webinar panel, there is at the bottom of the panel a handouts tab. If you hit the plus on that handouts tab right next to where it says handouts, you can actually see a PDF, which is it's a PDF of the actual presentation that Troy's doing today. And it'll have links in there and information to where you can get to resources that Troy is using throughout this presentation, which could be invaluable to using HY8 and actually determining a culvert size. So I would recommend downloading that for your use and possibly even using it during this webinar. Also, if you want to ask a question verbally over the webinar, you can do that. You have to actually set up your mic. Obviously, you have speakers if you're listening to this webinar, but you can set up your mic using the sound check, set up your mic, make sure it's working, and then during the questions section of the presentation, at the end of the presentation, you can actually raise your hand, clicking on the raise your hand button on the attendee tab. All right, excuse me, there's a raise your hand button on your all's panel, and then I'll actually see it, and we can actually click on you. You can speak. We'll unmute you. You can speak. If it's, you know, a big, long, drawn-out question and you don't feel like typing it out, you can do that. Otherwise, you can actually type a question into the questions panel, and we can answer those questions for you that way. Okay, right now let's do some poll questions. We'll do your first one. This is, I'm sorry if you've gone through this before, but this is stuff that we actually like to hear. And it's basically asking if you've attended the last webinar. So if you could vote on that now, hopefully we'll get plenty of participation in this poll. Okay, it looks like we're hovering around 86% voted. I was hoping we get it around 90, so we'll close it out and I'll share it. Looks like 53% did come to the last one and 47% didn't, which makes sense considering the specific nature of the last webinar, so that's good. Let's go ahead and do the next one. How many have you attended? Our numbers are growing, which is good. We've been seeing a trend towards several people getting greater than 10 webinars under their belt, which is awesome. Unless they're all out there lying, so. All right, looks like we're hovering around. Oh, looks like we're getting a couple people in there late. Let's give them a little bit of a chance. All right, we're over 90%. Share it. All right, so half of you have at least been to one webinar, which is great. That's awesome. That could be today, actually. 26% of you have actually been to 6 or 10, which is wonderful. A quarter of the people who are attending have been to at least 6 webinars. That's awesome. Keep coming. We appreciate it. And more than a quarter of you, almost a third, well, more than a quarter, have actually been to greater than 10 webinars. We love it. Keep coming and keep filling out surveys so we know what you want. We appreciate your attendance. Everybody, please keep coming back. I think these are a benefit to everyone, and we really enjoy doing them. Okay. Oops, sorry. On to the presentation. Let's see if Troy's ready here. Troy, are you ready?
I am.
Okay, Troy. I'm going to give you the baton, so to speak. It's all yours.
All right, so like Chris mentioned, we're going to be looking at sizing a pipe culvert using HY8. And he also mentioned that we have the handouts of the presentation available. So, and the reason we did that was there are some links that you might find helpful, so that you're not furiously scrambling to write these down. But HY8 is a culvert design software from FHWA, and it's a free program, but if you're a cabinet employee, it won't come automatically installed on your machine, so you'll have to go to this website and download it. We'll also be looking at the drainage manual some this morning, and that's online on the Highway Design drainage page. And then if you're in need of personalized support or anything, you can always email us at our KYTC CAD support email address. We're going to be doing a brief overview and general situation here, but if you have specific questions, or we've done some field visits to some of the districts where we actually sit and work on your project with you and try to explain some of this stuff to you. So we're available for whatever help we need to be here. So those are a few of the things we're going to look at today. The general process that I use to size a culvert, we're going to look at the first half of that today in the webinar. And then there's some next steps that we're not going to get to today. But the first thing you have to do is determine your design return interval. And we'll look at a chart that shows you how to do that. And then from that, we can calculate our design flow rate. And then we can put some information into HY8, and it will give us the information we need to decide what size pipe we're going to need. And then later on, we're not going to touch on this stuff today. We need to make sure our ditches drain to our inlet and that our outlet connects to an outlet ditch, and make sure that physically everything works. And then we can lay out our pipe on the pipe section and make sure that that looks good. And sometimes that's an iterative process. You might find something and have to go back and tweak something. And then once you get everything in there the way you want it, you've already done the preliminary sizing, so you're relatively confident that the pipes can work. But then you can go back to HY8 and put in your final values and do a final hydraulic check, and then use that for your drainage folder documentation. So we'll start off with determining the design return interval, and that's in the drainage manual on DR 402. I'll just show you where that is on the web. Sometimes our website is a little bit difficult. Scroll down through the obsolete old drainage manual, and you'll come to the one that we're actually using. And it's broken up by chapter, so we're in the hydrology chapter, DR 400. But I've got it locally here. So this is that page. It's page 3 in DR 402. And the way this works is we're looking at a culvert, so we'll be in this section here. And the road that we're going to be working on today, we're going to say is in this 400 to 2000 ADT. And so if you go over here, you see a D for your design storm, which is going to be 25 years, and a C for your check storm, which is going to be 100 years. If you have a really low ADT, under 400, then you'll be designing for a 10-year and a check. And then if you're on the interstate system, you'll be designing for a 50-year and 100-year check. So that's sort of how this chart works. And what the design storm and the check storm is the design storm is set up so that you want your culvert to pass the design flow, which in our case is going to be the 25-year flow, without overtopping the road. And then the check storm is we want to check the headwater elevation at the 100-year storm, make sure that we are not negatively impacting any surrounding properties. And it's good to compare, if you have an existing pipe and a proposed pipe, to compare the 100-year headwater elevations of both of them and see what you're dealing with. So let's jump back in here. So we've determined our design return interval on this project is going to be the 25-year storm for design. So now we have to get our design flow rate. There's two methods. There's the regional method and the rational method. The regional method is for larger watersheds. So the low end cutoff for some of the regions is going to be around 1/10 of a square mile. And there's a link to the drainage section here. So most of this is the regional equation, and it's Q equals K, A to the B, S to the C. And then depending on which region you pick, there's different parameters. So the project that we're going to be looking at today is in Region 1. So the drainage basin has to be at least 0.16 square miles for this equation to apply. And the one that we're looking at is not, so we're not going to be able to use this. But I like to check this, especially if I have a bigger watershed that I'm working with. If it fits this equation, this is easier and less time consuming than going through the rational method. But what you would do is go on here in the drainage manual and look for your region. So we're in Scott County around here. And then once you determine that you're in Region 1, then for the 25-year storm, these are your coefficients for K, B, and C that go in here. And all you have to come up with then is the area of your watershed, and then the slope from the 10th to 85th percent of the main channel length from the gauge. So it's a little bit easier, and then if you'll notice, it gets really easy if you're not in Region 1 or Region 4, because the slope is 0. Like if you go to Region, well, I don't have it on, I extracted some pages, but if you go to like a Region 2, the C value is 0, which takes this part of the equation to 1. So all you need is the area, basically. So if you're in Region 2, 3, 5, 6, or 7, and you have an area, then it'll kick out your flow rate immediately. So it's pretty easy, but once again, it only applies to larger watersheds. So that leaves us with the rational method, which I don't know if you remember from school, is Q equals CIA. C is going to be the runoff coefficient, and it determines the percentage of water that's going to run off. And then I is determined from the NOAA data, and then A, of course, is your area. So we have a rational method spreadsheet on our drainage website, and I'll show you how to get to that. If you just go to our highway design drainage and come down here to drainage resource materials, and then come down to Excel spreadsheets, rational method calculations, and we can just open it. So this is going to download a blank template. So I've got another sheet open. So this is as it comes down from the drainage website. So what I like to do is go ahead and save it. What we're going to do is make a template for our whole job. We can just put it on the desktop. And so I'm going to go ahead and fill out, I'm not going to bore you with this today, but you go ahead and fill out all your data here, your federal project numbers, your road names, your item number, and then save that. And then you can copy this sheet as you have different drainage areas that you're trying to determine. That way you don't have to refill that out every time. But the other thing that you want to do before you do that, before you save that template, is this will actually go find your IDF data from NOAA for you. So what you have to do is go to Options and enable the macros. And come here to this box that says Need IDF Data and change it to Yes. Now the way this sheet works is the keyboard command Control-R will run the macro that processes all the data on the sheet. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control-R after I've changed this to Yes. And it's going to ask me, do you want to retrieve IDF data from the website? I'm going to say yes. And then it's going to give me instructions. It's going to tell me to to locate the site on the NOAA map, change it to precipitation intensity, and then copy the table onto this tab here. And then I have to change it back to no and rerun it. So you can click and just drag this to near your project. And then you can zoom in. And this is where I'm going to be today. And alternatively, if you, instead of searching through it this way, you could type in the lat and long off your layout sheet if you've already got that, or that might be a little easier for you. But this is about where I am. So it's pulling this lat and long, and it's cranking in the black box to kick out all this data. This is precipitation frequency, and I don't want that. I want intensity. So I scroll back to the top under data type and change that to intensity. So now we have precipitation. Well, that's frequency still. Okay, that's what we need. We're on intensity, so we're good. So we copy this part of the table, and I just started at the title. Go down through here and hit Control-C to copy it. We'll flip back to here. And we can paste it here and watch the values change. So just to check to make sure it's changing, this says 0.018 now, so I'm going to paste the data. And it says 0.017 now, so we changed our data to the new stuff. And then we want to replace this location information. And that's right here. And we could watch it, and it updated the lat and long here. So we're good. So now all this data that's in the background of this spreadsheet is up to date with our project location. We run the macro, it's going to populate this design storm data that it's going to use here. So now we flip back to design flows. We change this back to no. We don't need IDF data anymore because we already have it. And then we hit Control-R again, and it ran it, and so we're good. So now our spreadsheet is set up. This is the point where I would save it, and then I would start saving it as probably the station name of where my cross drain was going to be or something like that. So let's see if there was anything else I wanted to mention. We're going to need some more stuff from the drainage manual as far as end values, but I think we are ready to go to MicroStation and take a look at some of this stuff. So the first thing we need to do when we are trying to size a pipe is to delineate the watershed area. So this orange line right here, this is where I want to put a pipe in. I've got, you can tell from the contours that all this hillside is draining down here, and if I build a road right here, it's going to make a pond. So I need to put an outlet right here. So the way I would do that, well, first of all, there's some cool tools here in the evaluation. They don't show up automatically. What you have to do is go to Tools, Application Add-ins. There's some there are hydrology and hydraulics tools. So you scroll down to hydrology and hydraulics add-in, hit OK. Now when you go to evaluation, there they are. So the one that I like to use is called Trickle. And you tell it which surface you're trickling, and I'm going to pick my existing surface and hit apply. And I'm going to lock my triangulation so that we won't get that message every time I click on that. So what this is doing is it's saying if I'm a drop of water and I get dropped here, I'm going to flow down this yellow line until I get to here. And you know, sometimes it gets confused, like when you get to the end of this yellow line, it doesn't know. I guess there's multiple paths it could go, so if you come down here, then it tells you where it's going next. So anyway, this kind of can show you, like when you're here, water's going back towards our outlet. When you get over here, water's going the opposite direction. So you can kind of jump back and forth and tell, you know, over here it's going to come to our outlet, and over here it's going to go back station to this outlet. So I use this tool a lot when I'm trying to figure out what's going on and where my drainage areas are to determine the extents of my drainage area. So that's kind of just a handy tool. But what I'll do here is we'll just go ahead and delineate this watershed. I'm going to start at this high spot at the top of this hill, and everything that's over here is going to flow away from my outlet, and everything over here is going to flow towards my outlet. And so I'll just come straight down the hill here, and then it'll just come straight over to here. And I can compare this to my proposed surface and make sure that I have that's where I think that break is going to happen on that cut. It may end up coming, my drainage area may end up coming over here, but what we can do is change our trickle to the proposed surface. Yeah, so everything back to here is going to flow and these don't have to be real precise, but everything back to here is going to flow to my outlet. It's going to come down this ditch into here. And then I'll come, see, I'll be a normal crown here. And I'm getting ready to super. So when I get to full super, everything is going to be going away from my outlet. So then I can just kind of trace, and I'm just chording it. It doesn't have to be precise. You'll see when we get to actually putting the values in here that it just doesn't have to be terribly precise when you're doing these areas. You want to get it as close as you can. So the same thing here. I think we're still going down grade here. So when I get to here, it's going to go on to the next one. I think we can look at our profile. That's at around 450. Nope. So it's coming back. So I was wrong. It's going to come back from around 452. And we could have trickled it too, but so right here, you can see it. This is where our break is going to be. So we'll just come out here. And what we're trying to do is just to bound this watershed. So we'll start again at the top of this hill. And we'll come this way, and now we've run out of survey. So there's an easy fix for that, especially when, you know, it might not make sense to survey only for the purpose of determining a drainage area. What you can do, we have this tool, it's the KY raster tool. We can just pull the topo map. So you go to KYTC task, KYTC software, KY raster, and click on KY topos and hit attach rasters, and it's going to attach the quad map, which is plenty precise enough for delineating a watershed. So we'll just it's aqua on top of green. That's not working too well, but we'll just continue along this saddle. We can pick up our survey again here. And I'll go ahead and that brings that raster here. I can go ahead and turn that off. So there's our watershed. We can go back and trim, but this is the area that is going to be draining to this pipe. So another little handy, I don't know, trick or whatever that I use, I don't know if a lot of people know about it or not, but if you put all these lines in a selection set, it's not a closed shape. You could make it a closed shape and then just get the area off of it. But if you put them all in a selection set, well, rats, I didn't go far enough. So we'll be going back to full super the other way. So now I've got my watershed completely defined, and I've got it in a selection set. So if I go to area, or measure area, change it to flood, and I want to be in view Z. I'm in a 3D file, but I don't want the global area. I want the area in the top view. And click in there. It's going to ignore everything that's not in the selection set. So it's giving me the area of my shape because I put it in the selection set. So it's square feet. I want US survey feet. So I've got 11.002 acres, if you believe that level of precision. So if you flip back to, so that's the area that we're going to be draining through this pipe. So if you flip back to our rational method spreadsheet, that information is going to go here. But the other stuff we need is overland sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and channel flow links. And what that does, that gives you the I of the Q equals CIA formula. So we have the A now. It's 11 acres. Now we need the C and the I. So we'll come back to the C in a minute. But the I is a function of the longest flow path. So how long it takes a drop of water to get to the outlet of the watershed. So it has 3 different segments. There's overland sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and channel flow segments. There's a statement in the drainage manual that says that it's in the past been KYTC common practice to disregard shallow concentrated flow as insignificant. So I take advantage of that to simplify the equation and put a length of 0 in there and just use overland sheet flow and channel flow segments. If in your engineering judgment you determine that you want to use shallow concentrated flow, there's a write-up on it in the drainage manual, and by all means go for it. One thing to note here on the overland sheet flow, that it's KYTC policy to not allow more than 300 feet of overland sheet flow. The longer your overland sheet flow is, the longer it takes for water to reach the outlet, and so the lower the flow rate is. So the longer your overland sheet flow is, the less conservative your design is. So once again, some of these values require engineering judgment to figure out. But after we get this thing filled out, I'll just show you a few things that hopefully will make you feel better about making those judgments. So we have to start defining these lengths for overland flow and channel flow. So what I do is come back to MicroStation, and we'll use this dark blue. Then we have to pick the longest flow path. So where is the furthest upstream point in the watershed? So I'm going to say it's right here. And if I'm a drop of water, I'm going to come down the contours like this until I get to the outlet of the watershed, which is going to be the inlet of my pipe, which is going to be right there. So I'm calling this my longest flow path. Sometimes if it looks if you can't really tell, you might have to check multiple flow paths, like maybe coming down this hill and down our ditch line into here might be longer. But so you can check multiple ones if you're worried about it. Like in this case, maybe we should check this one too. This one might actually be longer. And we can just measure a length real quick and just see. That's 675 and that's 755. So this one's actually longer. So we'll use that one just for fun. We can actually even probably extend that up to here. But as you can see, I mean, there's some judgment call. You're saying a drop of water that lands here is going to come down this hill into our ditch and down that way, which it might. So first thing we have to do is determine our overland sheet flow. And it can be a maximum of 300 feet. And this is 270. So that's where we'll break it. That's where we'll use our overland sheet flow. On this one, what I've been told to do is look for these V's. So around in this area, you start to see a V in the contour, and that means that a channel is developing. So on this line, I would stop my, well, I'd have to stop it at 300 feet, but I would stop it in this area. If it was closer, I would stop it in that area and have less than 300. So that's what I'm looking for, is those V's. The maximum of where the V's start to develop, or 300 feet. But we'll just do this one since it's the longest. So what I'll do here is I'll pull my elevation, and I'll go to Tools, and Tracking, and I want to track, I'm going to change my active surface back to my existing. And it's giving me elevation 987.05. So I'll put that on here just for documentation purposes. And then I'll pull my elevation. This is actually the elevation of my proposed surface, so I'll change my active surface. And that's 914.18. And now I have to figure out the elevation eventually of my outlet. And I'm snapping to my actual 3D feature, and I'm getting 887.05. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to break my line here, and then I'll measure the length of each half of it. So my upstream segment is 271. And we'll use all these lengths when we get back to our spreadsheet. And then my downstream segment, this will take me all the way to the outlet, is 503. Now, let's come back to the spreadsheet and look at it. When we get to our channel flow segments, you can break it up. So when we get to doing our final, this is just preliminary, but when we get to put our final numbers in, I might take a look at this ditch grade, and maybe I have a constant grade from here to there, and then a constant grade from there to there. I can break this channel length up into two segments with two different slopes and two different contributing areas, and I might do that if they were very different slopes, but it's probably not going to make that big a difference. So we'll go ahead and put these numbers in just to try to get our pipe sized. I've got too many windows open here. Let's see if we can. Let's see if we can make this a little more visible. Okay, so our length of our overland flow is 271 feet. That's this number right here. Now we have to have an end value for our overland flow, and I put a link to that in your handout where it is in the drainage manual. If you just hover over this red corner, it's going to give you a list of ones to pick from. And my window's too small to see them all. But and it's also helpful to have an aerial attached when you're doing this. So you can do that the same way through KYTC software, KY raster. And you can come down here and just get the Kentucky to 2012 1 meter. So this is forested area. So we're going to pick a corresponding end value for our overland flow. If I can get my window big enough to see it. So I'm going to call this woods, and we can just split the difference between 0.4 and 0.8 if you want. This is where, once again, sort of have to use some judgment. You can, and another thing that's good to do, like we can run this as 0.6 and then we can run it again as 0.8. It only takes 5 seconds and just see what the difference is. So that's kind of a good practice to just see what variables you use that are affecting things. So now for the slope, you could just measure the slope and type it in. I like to use a formula so that I know where my values came from. So if I hit equals 987.05 minus 914.18 divided by 271, then it's going to do the math for me, and that way if I come back to the sheet later, I can compare. If I change my design, I want to update all my drainage spreadsheets, I can tell if I use the right data or not. So we're done with overland flow. Shallow concentrated flow, I've changed the length to 0, so these variables don't matter anymore. And now channel flow. This is a roadway ditch, so I'm pretty sure that we're going to be in the 4-to-1 on the right. So this is the left side slope. I'm sorry, it'll be the left. Going ahead, it doesn't matter which one, but going ahead station will be on the left. So your fore slope will be 4-to-1, and then we're in a 2-foot flat bottom here and a V here, but and I'll prove it later. But for our purposes, we can just make it a 0-foot width to make it a V ditch the whole way, and then we'll have a 2-to-1 back slope here. And our length is going to be 503 feet, and our slope, we'll use another formula. So we're doing the top of the channel elevation minus the inlet of our pipe divided by the length. And we can get rid of these that came in here default. We're not going to use these. I guess I should have noted this a long time ago. The orange are user input values. Everything else the program will do for you. So we had 11.002 acres, and now we have a C value, and if you look at these values, forested areas is 0.1 to 0.3. The higher the number, the more conservative the design is, so I'm going to use 0.3 here. And that's basically, it's multiplying whatever answer you get by 0.3. So if we had this same area and it was concrete, we'd be multiplying it by 0.9, so it'd be 3 times as high. So it's something to keep in mind. So now we are done with the spreadsheet. Now we have to run it again. So we just hit Control R, and then it's telling me my 25-year flow rate is 15.6 CFS and my 100-year flow rate is 19.1. And we're running a little short on time, so I won't belabor this, but let's say you just screw it up and maybe it was supposed to have 250 feet instead of 271 feet of overland flow, and say you don't really have a 4-to-1 and a 2-to-1, but you have a 2-to-1, a 2-foot flat bottom, and a 2-foot back slope that's 600 feet long, and say your slope is 4.5% instead of 5.3%. Remember 15.6 and 19.1. We run it again and we get 16.3 and 19.5. So you have to put in something here, and you need to use a reasonable approach to get these numbers. But if you're going to stress over numbers on this sheet, stress over this one, because if you watch the numbers here, my range that I can choose from on forested areas is 0.1 to 0.3, and I chose 0.3, and I have 16 and 19. If I change this to 0.1, which I'm allowed to do based on these ranges, and run it again, remember I have 16 and 19, and now I have 5 and 6. So this, getting the right size area, delineating your watersheds correctly is very important to know how much area is draining there. And then having a good estimation of what the weighted C value is also very important. These other numbers, you have to put in something, and yes, they do affect the calculations, but you probably don't need to stress about it too much. So we're pretty much done with this sheet now. Now we've got our flow rates, so we can go to HY8. Do want to show you one thing before, and I just mentioned the C values. This one's easy because it's all forested pretty much. But if we were to look at another job, this is how I typically will do the weighted C values, is I'll draw a shape for my watershed. So everything out here is draining away from the road, and this is a very, very, very small roadside ditch, and all this stuff is draining back to our ditch. So I'll draw my contributing area, and then I'll delineate from an aerial or from my proposed, like these are actually proposed manuscript lines from my model. And so everything in here is asphalt, and everything out here is, I called it cultivated. And then I'll set up a spreadsheet. And this one in blue is the one I'm doing. So if you look here, I've got 565 and 1126, which are these two numbers here. And I have the weighted, or the C value that I would use for a cultivated area here. And then for the asphalt, I have my asphalt area. And then I have a formula here, which you can, it's just a weighted average. So if you need help with that, give us a call. But I'll set up a spreadsheet like this, and I've changed my labeling system now. I usually letter or number my drainage areas so that I don't have to figure out where they're at. But I'll have a spreadsheet here that'll have my weighted C values, and this is where I pull them off when I'm working. Well, I've already closed the spreadsheet now, but when I'm working in that rational method spreadsheet, I'll come here to get the weighted C values for that particular drainage area. So that's just a plug for doing due diligence on your weighted C values and trying to get something close to accurate, because if you're, delineating a drainage area can be tricky at times, but it's pretty straightforward. And the intensity calculation changes things, but only a little bit. And the weighted C value, you screw stuff up pretty quick if you are just making a guess and you make a bad guess. So I would encourage a thorough determination of your C values. So, gosh, we've been here 50 minutes, and I think we're finally going to open HY8. So let's do that. I believe I got too many windows open today. I have a link here on the desktop. So when you open HY8, you've downloaded it from that link that's provided in the handouts. And when you open it, this window is going to come up. If you have an existing file, you can open it here. We're going to create a new one. And it automatically created the first crossing for me. So this is where you would name it, and depending on how you're organizing your drainage structure or your drainage folder or how your mind works, you might call it like drainage area 1, or you might want to call it whatever station the pipe is at that you're draining. However that works for you, this is where you name it. And now we'll just go through all these values, and we'll do it based on, I'm going to hit cancel here. I need to move this window and it keeps beeping at me. So just do new, or I'll do new culvert crossing. And we'll just go through these values and hopefully explain what they mean, and then we'll be done. So discharge method, there's multiple. This one is the one that historically it was used at, so you could put design as 0, which means it's going to start the iteration of flows at 0. I'm sorry, minimum at 0. Design would be your 25-year. Maximum would be your 100-year, and it would iterate between the minimum and the maximum, bringing up the flow rate and checking the headwater at each trial, basically. You can also, this is the one we use today, do recurrence and hit define, and now we can enter our 25-year that we found on our spreadsheet was 15.6. Whoops. And our 100-year was 19.1. So you don't have to fill them all in. It'll just do the ones you fill in. You can fill them all in if you want, if it makes you happy. Tailwater data. This is going to be used if your culvert is outlet controlled. So we don't have an outlet ditch defined yet. We don't really know much about anything at this point. So we're going to assume it's a triangular channel with 2-to-1 side slopes. That's sort of my go-to assumption, unless I have a reason to assume something different. And now, if we go back to our plan view here, this is where this pipe is going to outlet, and it's going to run down this drain here. So I need to get my channel slope in feet per feet. So what you can do is just look here, and you've got 879.15, and then you come to your next survey point down, you've got 877.55, and then we can measure between them and get 47.62. And I believe we have a calculator here. And we'll just do this math real quick. And so that gives us a slope of 3.36%, or 0.0336. So we'll go back to HY8, and that's what we'll use. Whoops, I'm renaming it. Now for our Manning's channel N value, you can consult the drainage manual and I have a link to which page it is in the handouts, but I'm just going to assume this is 0.04 for now. And the channel invert elevation, this is going to tell it where the pipe outlets basically, which is going to be up here, which if I use this invert, it would look like the channel is well below the outlet of the pipe. So basically what we're going to assume is that this slope continues to here, and that's just going to be our assumption for this initial run. In reality, unless you have a really flat pipe, it's going to be inlet controlled, and this data is not going to make a huge difference. So I apparently dropped that, and it's not 3D anymore, so we'll have to go back to En-ROADS and track it. So I'm at elevation 883.75, so that's what I'll use for my channel invert elevation. That's my downstream data. Now when I came back to this, I would look at my pipe sheet and get my outlet ditch elevation and use that. So that'll be good enough for our first run here. When we get to roadway data, you can do a constant roadway elevation, which is what we'll do for time's sake. So we can go, I'm at station 447. So we'll go look at the profile. And this is going to determine the overtopping elevation. I don't think, oh, I have it annotated, so I'm good. So I'm at 909.83. So I'll come back to HY8. That's my crest elevation. Now all this does is determine when it's going to overtop. So if your headwater doesn't reach 909.83, then none of this matters. If you have a situation where you're likely going to be close to overtopping, you want to put some more care into this. There is a method here instead of constant roadway elevation that says irregular, and you can hit define. You could give it up to 15 coordinates, and you could actually come in here and say 446.50, 909.60, 447, 909.83, and you could type in all these values. And you can use 446.50. You don't have to start at 0. You can use your actual stations. It's just going to do the difference between them, so it doesn't care what you call it. And so you can define with a spline line, this to determine what your overtopping is going to look like. And if you're going to be close, then I recommend that. It's pretty easy to do. You will want to make sure that your headwater doesn't get above your lowest point, though, because you want to make sure that the overtopping is bounded. But for our example today, we'll just do constant roadway elevation. First roadway station and crest length is just going to determine the weir. If it overtops, it goes into the weir equation, I believe, and it tells you have a 100-foot long weir that the water's going over. So I usually just use 100. We're trying to design it so it doesn't overtop. So that'll be fine. And top width, I can just put in the width of the road is 30 feet. Now we're on to our culvert data. We're going to be using a circular concrete pipe. You can change the type of your pipe to steel or concrete if you want. It'll automatically update the end value for you, and I think give you some different inlet configurations. I usually just go with concrete, so we can get the metal pipe coated too. So you can change it from circular to you've got all kinds of stuff. You've got arches and concrete boxes if you have a small box culvert. I believe some of the conspan shapes and stuff are in here too for larger structures. But today we're just going to go with circular and concrete. Then our diameter of our pipe, we're just going to put in a 2-foot pipe, a 24-inch pipe, just to see if it works. Embedment depth, this would be if you were going to drop the pipe in the ground for some reason. Maybe you would do that if you had like a really big pipe and you wanted I don't know, to use it more like an arch culvert or something. I'm not sure. I always leave that as 0. I don't really know why you would use it. If someone knows, they feel free to tell me. Manning's in, it's going to populate this, but if you want to use .011 instead of .012 for concrete, then you're allowed to change it. Culvert type, you can do a broken back if you are tying to an existing pipe, say, and you're going to go down at one slope and then hit the new pipe and be at a new slope. You can do this single broken back and define these values for 2 different segments of a pipe. And it has double broken back too, so you can actually do up to 3 segments. But we're just going to use straight for now. It has the improved inlets here. And there's a bunch of other stuff that goes into that, but for simplistic sake, we'll just stick with a straight culvert type. And we'll stick with square edge with head wall. Maybe you're mitering it to the slope, or maybe you're just going to stick the pipe out of the fill and let it project. So whatever situation, or maybe if you're analyzing an existing and it's just grouped in projecting and that pipe's just sticking out of the fill, you can use that one. But we're going to assume this is a new pipe that we're putting a head wall on. And I'm not going to use an inlet depression. You can look at their help for what that means, but I never use that. So then lastly, we have to put in our culvert data. So this is where it's kind of odd to use. We're using an analysis tool to design the pipe. So we don't have an inlet station or inlet elevation, or we don't have any of that stuff. We're trying to determine how big it is before we do that. So we sort of have to just make something up, but we can make educated guesses. And the way that I do this is I'll take 887.05 for my inlet elevation, and I'll take 883.75, our downstream that we already picked off the plan view for downstream, and now we can start it at station 0, and now we can go pick our outlet station by just measuring the distance. So it's about 143 feet. So this is basically using this to get the slope and any losses, I suppose, if it's outlet control. But that's all the input data that's required. If you can also do embankment toe data, and you can basically give it the same data we just gave it, and it'll like shorten up the pipe based on how tall it is. And I usually just use it. I mean, you can use that if that makes you happy, but I usually just do this one, and I'll come back later. And after I've drawn the pipe on the pipe section and put in the actual data that I geometrically figured out on the pipe sheet. So now we're done. We can hit Analyze Crossing, and it's giving us our headwater elevation for the 25 and our headwater elevation for the 100. These are the 2 design discharges that we input, that we determine on our rational spreadsheet. And you can check your roadway discharge to make sure you're not overtopping, and we're not. There's some other tables here. You can check some of your, stuff like your tailwater depth and your outlet velocities, and check that kind of stuff out. If you want, now it's pretty easy. You can go back and say, well, that worked fine. Does a 1.5 work? 18-inch pipe. So increase my headwater elevation, but I'm still not overtopping. But I can check like 892.75 is my 100-year headwater, and well, I'm on the wrong surface. We'll look for that here. 892.75 is way up here. It's outside of the right-of-way pretty significantly. So I'd either, think about do I want to take a temporary easement here? Do I want to go with a bigger pipe to decrease my headwater? So those are just kind of design decisions that you need to be thinking about, but that's sort of the nuts and bolts of how you run the HY8. One thing that when we did our practice the other day that Patrick wanted me to mention, and I forgot, if you notice, this looks like you're done. If you scroll down, there's one more line that's number of barrels. So especially like if you're doing an old one and somebody's preliminarily done this like 3 18-inch pipes for some reason because of cover height or something, and you just open it and are working in it and you think you've just got one, then you're tripling your capacity and don't know it. So something to watch out for. It's going to default to 1 when you open it, but there is more data as you scroll down. So I think that's what I've got. Let me flip back to my PowerPoint. So, we've preliminarily sized it. We've decided that the 24 is what we want to go with based on the headwater, and now what you'd have to do is take that inlet elevation and see if you can get your ditches to hit that. Maybe your ditches are running out of the ground, and so you have to lower the invert. And so these 3 steps are really iterative. Like you run it, you get your size, you see if your ditch is great. If they don't, you have to change lay it out on a pipe sheet, make sure it works, and then you maybe have to change your inlet outlet elevations, then you take it back to HY8, make sure it still works. And you sort of do these 3 until everything tightens up and it's working, and then you can do your final one and turn it in. But that's the process that I go through. I'm sure there are other processes that other people have, and they might be just as valid. That's sort of how I do it. That's all I've got, Chris. I don't know if I haven't been paying attention to questions.
Yeah, it looks like we've got one question here so far. So, Troy, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it. Right now, if we've got any questions, if you want to raise your hand, that's great. We actually have one person raising their hand. It's somebody that Troy and I.
It looks like that somebody wants to know if I'm providing chicken minis for the presentation.
Yes.
The answer is no. I wish I was. If I was providing them, I would eat them all. Then it looks like we have another question. Wouldn't you have to break the 503 length since it's over 300 feet? That's a reference to that 300-foot overland flow length. That's a good question. We've got 503 feet here. This is a channel length, so we don't have any limit on the length that a channel flow segment can be. If this channel flows for a half a mile, then it's a half a mile, and that's the travel time we use. The 300 only applies to this overland where the water's not really flowing in a channel. It's just kind of flowing overland. So the 300 only applies to this first segment. I don't know how to do the whole hand raise thing. If you want to nominate the question person.
Well, there was somebody who had raised their hand, and that person accidentally did it, apparently. So it looks like there's nobody this time. Is there any other questions that somebody would like to over the question panel? I guess in the tab, I should say. Do a few seconds if you're typing it out. And if not, we can break for an early lunch or a late breakfast, however you want to look at that. Okay, no hands raised, no questions. Going once, going twice. Oh, there we go. How do you position the head walls?
Okay, that's probably a topic for another day, but what I would do would be to cut a profile along this pipe here, and I like to keep my inlet outlet ditches on the same grade as my pipe if I can, just for ease of figuring everything out. But what I do is just cut a profile along this line, and if I had that slope working in HY8, then I would graphically place the head wall on the same slope as the pipe and just sort of pull it back into the hill until it until it just barely caught the fill, and then it probably rounded up to the nearest foot or something. So I'm sure there are multiple ways to do that, but for me it involves cutting a profile and placing them on the profile graphically using our cell library.
Okay, I'm thinking that answered his question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll end this webinar for today. We want to thank you for coming, Troy. Thank you for presenting. This was great. Again, please don't forget to do your survey at the end of the webinar. We appreciate that. Again, thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks again.